Hi students, welcome to week 1, episode 1 of Drawing 1. I want to welcome you all to what I think is going to be a really exciting semester for you. What I want you to understand right from the start is that anyone can draw beautifully. Anyone can be taught to draw. Drawing is something that, although it seems magical, it's really an accumulation of logical steps. And that's what this semester is going to be. We're going to start off with some super basic skills and exercises, and then we're going to build on those step by step by step. And although we're going to start with some very, very simple concepts, those concepts are going to evolve as we go along, and we're going to build block upon block. A month from now, you're going to be doing some very, very sophisticated things, but those sophisticated things start with some very simple concepts, and that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about all the basics, paper and pencils, and also some exercises that will help you break away from writing, which is our most common way of making marks on paper. But drawing has very, very little to do with writing. Writing is connected to words, and words only have a limited value. Drawing is a language, but it's bigger than all other languages combined. There are an infinity of ways of touching a pencil down on paper, and by the time we're done here, you're going to have a different idea of what paper is and a different idea of what a pencil is and what a pencil is capable of. So let's dive in with some super basic foundation kind of skills. We're going to sharpen some pencils. So let's talk about our most basic tools that we're going to be using in this semester of drawing, which are graphite pencils. And artists' graphite pencils are basically just a combination of graphite and different binders, like clay, for example. And those different combinations of graphite and clay produce an entire range of softness to hardness. So in the pencils that I've asked you to get, usually the pencils start with maybe a 6B, and as we go down the scale, the larger the number in the B range, the softer the graphite. So this is actually a 12B from one of my other sets of pencils. And that's very, very soft pencil. Down to a 2B, which is rather soft. There's a whole range of pencils in the middle, a B, an F, an H, and a B, and there's also an HB. But then going up to the sharper and harder range of pencils, usually the harder pencils will begin as maybe a 2H and go up to a 4H. You can actually get a 6H, but it almost doesn't even leave a mark on the paper. So that's the basic spectrum of pencils. In terms of preparation, you are probably used to the idea of just taking a pencil and putting it in a pencil sharpener and getting a very basic point. In the world in which you're entering, a pencil is no longer just a pencil. We can start thinking of pencils as being more like paintbrushes. So instead of writing with a really cramped, tight hand, our pencils become really more of a paintbrush that's capable of all sorts of beautiful expression. And as we go along in our sophistication about drawing, we're going to find that pencils are capable of a huge, exquisitely gigantic range of touch on the paper. And then there's this combination of pencil and types of paper, and there are basically dozens, but literally hundreds of different paper surfaces, from the smooth newsprint that I asked you to get to the smooth drawing paper that we're going to be doing our more finished work on. But newsprint is where we're going to be doing most of our basic exercises. And I'll be giving you some exercises a little bit later. So in terms of preparing our materials, preparing our pencils, this is really what an artist's pencil looks like when it's ready to work. And we want to expose a lot of lead because we're not just drawing with a stylus. We don't just draw with a point, although we do sometimes. Most of the time, we're really getting all sorts of nice nuance with our pencil and building our vocabulary. And we'll talk about vocabulary as we go on. Shakespeare, if you're a fan of Shakespeare, or James Joyce, for example, Shakespeare had a vocabulary of something like 28,500 words. James Joyce, who wrote Dubliners and Ulysses, if you've ever read James Joyce, had a vocabulary of about 30,000 words. And the more words you have, the more nuances, the more angles and facets of the world and experience you're able to describe. The smaller your vocabulary, the less you're able to communicate in beautiful detail. And words aren't really that effective after all, compared to visual art. So the exercises we'll be doing will be an effort to just kind of improve our vocabulary of line, the ways we can express the visual world through these little tools that we have. And the very next thing that I'm going to do is to give you exercises that I want you to start with and stay with. I had the good fortune of studying classical music for about 8 years or so, classical guitar and then classical violin. And the best musicians that I studied with would practice the very simplest exercises at the beginning of every day, even though they went on to do extremely difficult and complex musical pieces later in their practice sessions. They would just start with the most basic strokes, the most basic sort of muscular postures, and the most basic ways to play with intensity while also being relaxed. And we'll talk about that too in a little bit. So let's talk about some exercises that I want you to start every drawing session with. So exercise number one. I was very lucky to study violin with one of the greatest violin players I've ever met. And at our very first lesson, he gave me an exercise that I thought was really strange at the time, but the more I did it, the more it made sense. And I'm translating that exercise into a pencil exercise. All of the other classes that you take are going to be creating a lot of pressure. Pressure to understand, pressure to learn, pressure to memorize, pressure to perform under test situations. This drawing class will be the class where you let that pressure out. Here's a good exercise to start with. And again, my violin teacher had me do this at my very first lesson. He had me place my bow, if you can think of the pencil as a bow. He had me place my bow on one of the violin strings. And he said, take a deep breath. And as you exhale, pull the bow down on the string as you exhale. And as you exhale, the note goes from the tension in your lungs to the lower and lower and lower tension as you exhale. Let's translate that into a pencil exercise. This is an essential way of breaking away from the idea of writing and into the idea or into the world of drawing. So I'm holding a B pencil here. So I use B pencils a lot. So I'm going to start with a lung full of air. Don't hyperventilate, but I'm just going to take a relaxed, deep breath, touch my pencil down with full pressure, and then as I exhale, so my pencil line really becomes my breath, my exhalation. A very good friend of mine, the great painter Jerry Perino, who is chairman of the art department at Salve Regina, where I taught, says that we inhale life and we exhale art. That's very true. So here's a really simple exercise. When you're sitting down to draw and you're breaking away from the everyday world into this space where you become an artist, start with this stupidly simple exercise of just... And the pressure on the page equals the pressure inside you, going from more pressure to less pressure. The pencil line is really your breath. It's you exhaling onto the page. It couldn't be simpler, but it also could not be more important in your journey from becoming a writer to a person who draws beautifully. More exercises. This is going to seem like a penmanship exercise, but it's somewhere in between the world of writing and drawing. But it really just gets your hand and your arm more fluid. Now, when we draw, we don't want a lot of tension in our hand. One of my violin teachers told me that you know, if your hands are not like soft clay, they're not going to listen to you. So keep your hands soft, keep the tension out of your hand. There is no tension, there is just contact on the paper. So there's a basic penmanship exercise of just doing these soft, overlapping ovals in between two lines that I've made with my straight edge. Super simple exercise. Super simple exercise number 2 is to overlap those ovals in the other direction. Now, you don't have to be perfect. This is just a matter of breaking away from writing and just getting used to touching down on the page. And all of these exercises are done on newsprint. Newsprint is just like, it's just disposable. It's like a paper towel. You use it once and you toss it out. But I want to see you doing these exercises, and this is one of your first assignments. I really want to see you doing these exercises. Exercise number 3, we're just kind of develop those overlapping circles into S-curves. Again, no tension. These are kind of like the exercises that figure skaters have to do. It just gets you used to the idea of being fluid and relaxed. And so on. So, that's one set of exercises, from just kind of exhaling on the page to doing these just beautiful, graceful, overlapping circles, overlapping S-curves.